I never think before I speak. It just like comes out. So I have no idea what I just said.
Welcome to the Settlers of Seoul podcast. This is Arius Dare. Our guest today is Elise Hu. Elise is the Seoul bureau chief and Asia correspondent for NPR. Her coverage area includes both Koreas, Japan, and she contributes to stories across the Asian region. Previously, she covered the intersection of technology and culture for the network from Washington, D.C. She joined NPR in 2011 following television reporting jobs in Texas, South Carolina, and Missouri. Elise is an honors graduate of the University of Missouri-Columbia School of Journalism, and her work has earned a Gannett Foundation Award for Innovation in Watchdog Journalism, a National Edward R. Murrow Award for Best Online Video, and the Austin Chronicle once dubiously named her the best TV reporter who can write. Outside of work, she's an advisor to the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, a panelist on Foreign Correspondents, a talk show on the Korean network Arirang, sits on the board of Grist magazine, and is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. This interview was a lot of fun to do. Elise was an absolute blast to talk to. We cover a lot of ground in this interview, owing to her experience here on the ground. She has been able to write on a wide breadth of different things, and it really shows in this interview. We talk about Pyeongchang, we talk about Bitcoin, we talk about parking lots, we talk about what it is like to be a foreign journalist here, we talk about opportunities for women, just a whole bunch of stuff that I certainly learned a lot from, and I hope you do as well. So without further ado, here's Elise. Elise, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So walk us through how you became the NPR bureau chief and correspondent in Seoul.
Okay, so I had moved to D.C. in 2011 from Texas, where I had spent the majority of my 20s. After 3 or 4 years in D.C., I kind of got the itch to leave. And so I started having conversations with managers about, hey, how do I get out of D.C., which happens to be the headquarters of National Public Radio, NPR, where I work. They knew that I had always been internationally minded, the managers did. And so the idea of opening another bureau, another foreign bureau, had been percolating for a while, especially as this was around the time there was more of a troop pullout of Afghanistan where we had a bureau. And so the idea to open a new bureau and shut down Kabul was in the works. So my managers came to me and said, would you be interested in opening a new bureau in Seoul, which would also be responsible for covering Japan? And I said, yeah, absolutely, I would be. I had never stepped foot in Korea before.
It's not your first time to Asia, though. You had done some work in Taiwan as well, correct?
That's right. So when I was 20 years old, I had worked abroad during a study abroad semester in Taipei. My mother is Taiwanese, and I was interested in spending some time during my college years working and studying abroad. And so I chose a place that was very close to my mom and close to me, personally. And so that was a really exciting time, having to work in different languages. And so I had always hoped that I would be able to be a foreign correspondent at some point in my life. However, my entire adult life, journalism has been contracting or in a state of contraction. And so I really didn't expect it to happen ever. The fact that I am sitting here with you right now in Seoul, South Korea, as a bureau chief for a bureau that I got to open, that's supported by a large national news organization, and having my life subsidized by that organization is really a huge privilege. It's something that's highly rare in journalism today, and I'm really appreciative of that and aware of how special it is.
Yeah, NPR is great. I grew up listening to KUOW in Seattle.
Yeah.
I swear I could hear Terry Gross say "fresh air" forever on repeat. It's the best.
She says it in the best way too. She's like, "Fresh air."
I'm Terry Gross. I can't even get close, right? So as an organization, NPR has been around for a while, but how has it changed since you first came on board to now? I mean, obviously, as an international correspondent, I think that you get kind of an outside-in kind of view. Where do you see NPR going in a increasingly digitalized world?
When I went there, it was to be a digital editor. And so my perspective at NPR was always colored from this perspective of NPR needing to be a lot more digitally minded and digital first and less radio centric. And that has certainly happened in my 6-7 years there now. And You can see that in our priorities. So editorially, it always mattered in the newsroom a lot who was on air and who was getting airtime. And podcasts weren't as much of a priority, even though they were always prominent or they always had a place at NPR. It was always kind of like the skunkworks team, like the people who were experimenting and innovating were doing that on their own rather than institutionally supported. That has really flipped now. There's a lot of institutional energy and support behind podcasting in a way that didn't exist 7 years ago when I started at NPR. Now the newsroom is thinking like, we're going to put breaking news on npr.org first. We need to push to all of our channels socially in a way that wasn't at the top of mind, I think, across the entire newsroom when I started. And now that's a priority even for folks who had come up strictly in radio. So I'm really glad to see that. As to your question for where things go forward, I'm really interested in what's happening in the smart digital personal assistant space. So the Alexas of the world, and what's happening
Alexa,
there.
play NPR.
Exactly. And I am hoping that our product teams are doing a lot more to be prepared for greater and greater adoption of the Amazon Echoes and the Google, what's the Google Home Assistant called? I can't even remember.
Cortana.
No, that's Microsoft. Microsoft is Cortana.
Oh, you're right. Does Google have I thought it was just Google Now?
Yeah, I don't remember. Yes, I don't think, hopefully it's not some woman's name.
That's right. Cortana comes from Halo, which Microsoft owns, of course.
But yeah, that's a space that I think, hey, we're an audio news organization, or we started out as an audio news organization. We better be ready for products that are designed around voice and voice activation. And I think that that's definitely happening. Hopefully it's happening fast enough. And I'm excited about it. Yeah, going forward.
Switching gears to Korea, how do you feel your job is, I guess, made more difficult or easier in audio specifically? I don't know that that NPR is so well known here, or maybe it is.
It certainly is well known among Koreans who have spent time abroad. And so any government officials that I meet, most of them have done a stint in Washington and say to me, oh, I practice my English by listening to NPR. I liked to listen to NPR on my way into work because I drove in from Annandale, which is a suburb outside Washington, D.C., where a lot of Koreans lived. And so the more international or globally minded Koreans certainly have heard of NPR and know it really well. Other folks that I interview, other sources, we just have a little 1 or 2 line introduction of, hey, this is what we are. We're a national news organization, American broadcaster. We have 30 million listeners a week and 1,000 affiliates. And they generally get the idea. And you can see all our stories online at npr.org. And so that isn't a problem. That certainly hasn't been a problem. Access here hasn't been too difficult. And I would say in comparison to Japan, talking or getting access with folks in various government ministries has been easier, or just a few steps, I guess, shorter. It's a shorter path to get interviews secured. Sometimes sources ask for a pre-interview where I actually have to show up in person before an interview to just have some tea or meet in person, or my fixer has to do that for me if I'm not physically there. And so that is a little easier in Korea. But I don't think we've run into any major problems because people didn't know what NPR was.
Do you find that there's a specific topic or question that is very difficult for Koreans to answer?
I think it's always, it depends. I mean, it just depends on who you're interviewing. I think it's always going to be difficult when I'm asking questions in English, they're being translated for me into Korean, and then the answer is coming in Korean and then being translated for me into English. So that's like several steps removed from the original intention, right? I mean, I have very good interpreters that I've worked with over the past few years who act as my proxy, and that has made for, that kind of makes or breaks you as a foreign correspondent who doesn't speak in the native tongue of the country in which you report. However, it certainly is nuance that's lost in translation. There might be sarcasm, or there might be, tinges of degrees or shades of what you're trying to say that I wouldn't really be able to hear even when properly translated, even when the words themselves are properly translated. And so I think that makes it difficult. And it takes a tool away from me too, right? Because as a journalist, one of the most important things I do as an interviewer is I need to connect with my sources and create a temporary intimacy. And in order to do that, it really helps when you both speak the same language. And when you don't, then you're relying on all sorts of other nonverbal cues. And so I would say I've gotten better at that because I've had to learn how to communicate in ways besides speaking.
Well, some might say that, you can't really truly understand Korean stuff, let's say politics, culture, what have you, if you're not reporting in and reading in the native language. What would you say to somebody that says, don't read the Yonhap News or NPR or even Reuters because, it's in English, and how could you possibly understand this 5,000-year-old culture?
I think there's value in both. Of course, it's more advantageous to be able to look at a culture in a complete way by understanding its language and speaking its language. I think those journalists who, are quote unquote Kyopos, so Korean Americans who have one foot in each culture have real advantages because there is some knowledge of that culture having grown up as a Korean, but then also as a fully American. And so I think those folks really do have a certain kind of advantage, but we do our best. And there is a real value too to having eyes that aren't yours, right? Perspective that's from outside of Korea, looking at your culture in a way that might be completely fish out of water. I think there's advantages to that. For instance, when I went to work in South Carolina as a television reporter in my early 20s, I got sent to cover NASCAR, so stock car racing. And this was completely new to me. And the whole reason I got sent to cover NASCAR was because it was something that I had never covered before. And the journalistic or editorial value there is that, hey, you haven't seen this before. It's brand new. It's essentially like a foreign country and a foreign culture. What will you see? What will you observe? And what kind of takeaways can you get from that? And I think that's the same thing. There is value in, when it comes to foreign correspondents who don't speak the language, there is value to people who are curious and observant, coming into a culture that's not their own, with a certain lens and looking at it from that perspective. There's really no way for me to do it the other way. I can't do it both ways. But as somebody who can speak Chinese and has tried to cover Chinese culture, it's easier. It's certainly easier. But I don't know that I'm necessarily way better just because I can speak the language.
What was your insight at the NASCAR race?
It was so long ago now.
Because now,
I loved it. I really loved covering the Daytona 500.
I would just go around counting the MAGA hats.
Oh, right. Sure. There's a certain political bent to it, right? It was very white. That is one thing. There was very little racial diversity down at Daytona. But I really enjoyed it. The whole subculture of NASCAR and the way that brands had such a prominent place on all the players. They literally wear these patches all over their bodies and for various brands, and the teamwork involved in these pit crews and the lore that was involved in NASCAR, because Dale Earnhardt Jr. was really expected to do well that year, and he kind of flamed out. He's now retired, but he kind of flamed out. But there was all this hope pinned on him because of his late father, Dale Earnhardt. And so all these stories and narrative involved in sports, I really like. I think that in another life, I could do really well being a sports reporter. Yeah, in general, I had a good time. And the takeaway, I guess the main insight is what I just brought to you, which is that it was valuable for the news organization and for myself to go into a situation cold and to just experience it as it was.
Speaking of NASCAR sponsorship, Dogecoin quite famously sponsored two cars at two different races. So I want to use Dogecoin as a segue into the next question. Okay. You have a background in tech. You did All Tech Considered, at least from what I read. That's kind of your expertise, among many others. So my question is, right now, as of this recording in January 2018, the cryptocurrency market in Korea is just all sorts of crazy. There's talk of regulation. There's talk of a complete ban on trading. There's been wild price fluctuations, although that's certainly true in all markets. But I want to ask your opinion on where do you see cryptocurrency going in 2018 under this current administration?
I have no idea. Actually, I've thought very little about cryptocurrency except to make jokes about Potcoin, which is the marijuana cryptocurrency, which sponsored Dennis Rodman's latest trip to North Korea.
There's a lot of great ones. So Dogecoin, Potcoin. Yesterday I saw Garlicoin.
Oh my gosh.
Which was literally based on a Reddit post that said, if this post gets 30,000 upvotes, I will create a cryptocurrency based on garlic bread. And there's nothing more than that. There's also Banana Coin, which is actually tied. It's not a fiat currency, apparently. It is actually tied to a real value of 1 kilo of organic bananas. So the real world price of 1 kilo of organic bananas will be the price of banana.
It's backed by bananas.
It's backed by bananas.
That's amazing. No, I really haven't watched it that carefully because I don't consider myself somebody who's an expert in the tech business, really, or the technical aspects like programming or anything like that. When I covered technology and humans, technology and culture, which was a really specific intersection. So I would say I covered dating more than anything else because that had been really changing under the advent of Tinder and Lulu and all these apps and things like that. So no, I haven't thought a whole lot about cryptocurrency, nor have I had to cover it here in South Korea. I'll be interested to see what happens, but I am not somebody who holds any Bitcoin. I never mind it, and I don't have a Coinbase account, for example. I would say when this Bitcoin craze was really happening in South Korea at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, one of my first reactions was, wow, of course this is happening in South Korea because this is such a trend-driven culture. When churros were big, every corner had a street churro. When the Castella cake was big, there was suddenly all these pop-up Castella cake shops. And so ditto for Bitcoin, whatever it is in the moment, I think there's a real sort of crowd mentality that then happens around whatever is hot, and then it just dies away. And so you're right, that can be destabilizing for any sort of currency. To the extent that government can regulate that and come in and do something about that is up to them, and what ends up happening, I'll just be interested to see.
So besides, I think that North Korea is kind of a black hole of foreign media coverage. I'm sure that some of your most read stories have to do with North Korea, the security situation here. But being here and also spending time in the region, what do you think is an underrated or underappreciated story or topic that you think deserves more coverage?
I don't know that there's anything specifically, but what I would say is, in general, I wish I had more time to do enterprise about South Korean society and life, irrespective of what was happening with the North Korea security situation. And I think that's true of North Korean society and life, too. I mean, we end up covering North Korea from afar. So I could do just as good a job covering North Korea if I were based in Tokyo or Taipei or maybe even Washington, arguably better on the security front from Washington, where there's a lot of security sources. And so I would love to have more of a lens on actual lives, the people who work for the FedExes of North Korea or in restaurants or,
everybody wants to talk to the coupon
dryers,
man.
Right? And so I think that's true of South Korea too. This is such a dynamic society that has changed so quickly. And a lot of times we have been able to look at the society when there are hooks for news. So, for example, when the South Korean singer, the Kpop singer, killed himself, that opened up a conversation again about the suicide problem here and how it has the highest suicide mortality
lead singer of BTS. Am I getting that right?
Shiny.
Oh, Shiny. Sorry.
Oof.
I know. Terrible K-pop fan.
Oof.
Non-existent K-pop
fan. That was a K-pop fail by you.
We're gonna get a whole bunch of hate mail.
Yeah.
All two listeners of the show are gonna be very disappointed.
Geunhye, yes, of the K-pop group Shiny. R.I.P. That opened up a lot of questions again about the society here. I didn't do that story because I've already examined suicide and the hyper competitive education culture. But I think this society is so interesting in that it went from agrarian, so poor as sub-Saharan Africa, just 2 generations ago, to now the 11th richest country in the world. And for for a society, for a country to economically develop that fast means that there's a lot of societal questions or adolescence that it didn't go through, a lot of reckoning about, what is social justice? What does that mean for us? What does equality look like? What does opportunity look like? What does success look like? And those are questions that I really think South Korea has been in such a hurry to measure itself by economic standards. Like, how do we compare? How do we rank when it comes to GDP? That it hasn't considered, hey, how do we rank when it comes to gender equality and those sorts of questions? And to the extent that I can do more stories about that, that's interesting to me. But often when there's breaking news, it takes us away from that. And the breaking news is inevitably another missile launch, another nuclear test.
Yeah. I mean, one story that I think did get a lot of coverage in the international press was the Park Geun-hye impeachment and candlelight protests leading up to that decision. Can you walk us through what it was like reporting on that and what you see now a year and a half removed?
Sure. It started out rather ordinarily, I suppose, because there's such a rich, vibrant protest culture here. And it arguably started out on the campus of Ewha University, which is a women's university here in South Korea during the summer of 2016. So these women, these young college women, were protesting their president or, a leader in the administration. And this president was friends with the then president Park Geun-hye, the now deposed former president Park Geun-hye. It started out there with, these women protesting something that seemed unrelated. But then there was a little bit more journalism that led to other aspects that were questionable about the Park administration. And how they were maybe punishing journalists that were reporting negatively about the dealings of the administration. And then there was this JTBC anchor who started doing a lot more investigative reporting, which revealed the extent of influence that Park Geun-hye's best friend, longtime best friend, and essentially a secret advisor, who was the daughter of a guy who was the leader of a shamanistic cult.
Who channeled Park Geun-hye's dead mother at one point.
Yes. So there's all these mystical elements of this story, too, that get a lot of play. But Chae Soon-sil. So Chae Soon-sil is the name of the Park Geun-hye, the deposed president's best friend. And so suddenly, something that started out as small protests about government overreach, potential blacklists of cultural folks, artists and writers by the government, for being not favorable to the government, and then possible punishing of journalists. So these were all sort of separate little things that were percolating, which then just snowballed once there were revelations that there was possibly this Ajuma puppet master behind it all, who was doing everything from choosing the president's clothing to making major decisions on policy regarding North Korea and editing speeches. And that was like the great breakthrough of this, right? The revelation that a Chae Soon-sil tablet PC was leaked, I guess, to JTBC, this news organization. And on the tablet PC was evidence of Park Geun-hye's speeches that had been heavily edited and redacted and changed by somebody who was not in government at all, just a friend. And so this then became a feeding frenzy. And very soon we saw people in the streets holding candlelights and sitting down in the main thoroughfare that cuts across Seoul, demanding that the president resign. But that was going on for weeks and weeks and weeks before there was actually movement to remove her from office, because she had apologized. She came out and apologized and still was showing no signs of backing down. Even as impeachment proceedings began and started really happening in earnest, the president did not resign, which we were expecting, because there are some other precedents of presidents in other countries, when forced under pressure, not wanting to be formally impeached, but just choosing to resign. Instead, she did not. She dug in her heels. And eventually, by spring of 2017, Park Geun-hye was out. Not only was she impeached by lawmakers, she was removed by a constitutional court. So that was pretty historic to watch a president who, If you asked me at the beginning of 2016, will Park Geun-hye end her time in office in this particular way, I would have been like, you're crazy. Everybody just seems to accept her status quo or accept the status quo. Yeah, she's kind of incompetent, but nothing beyond that. And then suddenly everything happened really, really quickly. And it was really powerful to see all the people take the streets like that.
Yeah, quickly seems to be the national slogan around here. On your blog, you write that you work in intervals, right? In these all-out sprints followed by a rest and recovery period. When you're covering a story like Park Geun-hye or North Korean missile launch, I mean, how does your working style mesh with the Bali culture here?
It's there's some elements, I think, of Korean culture that are very fast, and then others that I think are far less intense than, say, Washington. So when I lived in Washington, for example, people would get up and have breakfast meetings at 7 a.m, and then a second breakfast meeting, and then go into work at 9. Like, stuff in Korea doesn't even open until 10:30. So, and then it closes pretty early too. Like New York, everything is 24/7. Taipei, everything is 24/7. And I find, if you spend any time in Shanghai, for example, that it feels like things are moving much faster and it's more dynamic than Seoul. So there is this sense, on one hand, that it is a very fast-paced culture here. And in some ways it is because people are impatient. And what I mean by that is people expect things to be delivered quickly, problems to be solved quickly. And I love that about Korea, because if my car battery needs to be replaced, somebody will bring a battery on a scooter within 15 minutes of me calling for a new car battery. Like, that would never happen in the US. And so I love that about Korea, but I don't think it necessarily means that all of society is just really dynamic and fast. I just think there are expectations of quickness when you have a problem. And so those problems are addressed by the service industry, which then has to work quickly. But I don't know that all of society is like, oh yeah, we're go, go, go all the time. Because as you know, people work really long hours in South Korea, and yet all this research and studies show that it's not efficient. Like, people don't work efficiently, they just work long hours. Right.
I think it's the second highest average in the OECD, not too far behind Japan, and some of the lowest per hour productivity.
Right.
I think was what the studies show. Quality.
So that's not exactly
guys.
poly,
Right.
That's just being at work for a long time.
It's Bali for an hour and a half, followed by 8 hours of online shopping. My own experiences are. So you said that you really like that. You like the fast service. If there's a problem, you can find a solution to that. But what is an unpopular opinion that you have about Korea? Something that you don't like, or maybe something that you like that you don't find resonates with other people?
Oh, I don't know that I have any unpopular opinions about South Korea that you haven't heard already. South Korea is a lot more internationally minded and global than it was probably 20 years ago, but I still find it to be rather closed in terms of societal openness.
Could you give an example?
I expected there to be a lot more English in Seoul when I moved here. There isn't. I expected the population to be a lot more diverse. It is not. And Koreans, in my experience, have really liked to stick together. They're quite cliquish in a way that is difficult for people like me, foreigners, to be a part of the clan, to be accepted. And I think that's really difficult, especially when you move here and you're in your first year and you're not used to that. Your expectations are of more places like Singapore or places in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, or even Jakarta, places where people are really open and accepting and speak more English, and there's just more accessibility for you if you're international. Seoul is not like that. Seoul largely it's still very, very difficult to get around if you don't read Korean, speak Korean, have somebody who can interpret Korean for you. There are a lot of things that I think are closed off to me as somebody who, didn't come in with knowledge of the language, which now has really gotten a lot better now that I've learned enough to get by. But it shouldn't be that way if it's such an international city, or if it wants to be an international
That's
city.
how it brands itself.
Right.
What is something that is, I guess, still difficult for you, or something that you struggle to understand about Korea, or something that you think you're just never going to get?
Backing in. I don't understand why everybody Buddy backs in.
So like when you park your car, backing into a parking spot.
Yeah, well, I don't understand. Like, why spend all this time backing your car in? Maybe, I don't know that it saves that much time when you're pulling out. You know what I mean? So that drives me crazy. I don't understand. This is another car thing. I don't understand why they keep parking garages so like squeaky clean. The floors of parking garages, like, why are you zamboning parking garage floors like every day? Why is it necessary to keep the parking garage floor clean enough to eat off of? I don't understand. I'll never fully understand that.
That was a great answer.
Okay.
I've asked something like, various iterations of that before. But that's great. Backing in and very clean parking garages that are like literally squeaky clean, so that when you turn your wheel, it squeaks, so everybody can tell where you're from.
Why is this happening?
So, on a recent interview on the Divided States of Women podcast, an excellent Vox Media production. Vox has a lot of great podcasts these days. You see that in Korea and Japan as well. A man's role is assumed, while a woman's place in society has to be earned. And I was hoping you could expand on this idea, like maybe describe how this impacts your everyday life here.
Sure. I mean, every institution and at the tops of every institution that's considered important in Korea and Japan are all men, or almost uniformly men. I mean, the tops of chaebols, which are the multinational conglomerates like Samsung, LG. The only time a woman is at the head of an organization like that is because she is the daughter of the guy who started it, the daughter of a founder. We have all men boards, who control companies. Government is all men. The head of the Ministry for Gender Equality here Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, I think, is still a man under a progressive organization, unless that's changed. I'm looking at my assistant. Yep, still a man. Oh, it changed.
Progress in real time.
Great. Okay, so that's great. I'm glad to be wrong about that. And then you have the largest wage gap in Korea of all the industrialized nations that are a part of the OECD. And so there's plenty of examples in which men are in the positions of power, or what society considers position of power, and women are completely invisible. And it's not because they aren't educated or smart. It's because they're hitting some sort of ceiling on the way up, and discouraged.
Similar to the US, I mean, women graduate at far higher rates than men here. I believe it was in 2008 that it switched.
Yeah, and I don't hold the United States as some sort of paragon for gender equality,
not.
But it is doing better than here, which ranks like 115th out of 145 nations for gender equality according to the World Economic Forum. And so that's down there, like, with various West African, East African nations below Saudi Arabia, where women couldn't drive until recently. And so it's not good for women here. I think the success is so narrowly defined for a woman, and then looks matter so much that's internalized and culturally normalized very, very young. I mean, the only way you were really complimented if you're a little girl is for your looks, and you're also not encouraged to do things besides be pretty, right? Women or young girls aren't pushed into sports here in a way that they are in the United States. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and when they're complimented, it's always either generically about their being cute or being beautiful, or something specific to their looks, like, oh my gosh, her eyelashes are so long. Are those fake eyelashes? And so I'm like, no, she's 3 or whatever. And so, but the fact that could be a question, I think, says something about societal norms. And there's a lot of reinforcement of that besides just advertisements, right? This is coming from people's parents and their sisters and, their teachers, that, hey, you need to look better. Your appearance needs to be as attractive as possible in the eyes of Koreans. And who sets these beauty standards? Typically the men who are at the heads of entertainment companies, who decide what K-pop girls are supposed to look like and what skin they can show and what skin they shouldn't, and all of these things. So we have to really look at the structures here and who the decision makers are. And the decision makers in Korean society, in Japanese society, tend to be all men. And I think that that is a huge problem for the future for this country and for Japan's, because these are countries with facing some real demographic and economic hurdles. And half of its potential workforce not working or working less than its potential is a lot of just economic output that's lost. And I'm talking about women not working. And then when women don't feel empowered to have choices in terms of how their lives look and how to design their careers and their home lives, they're also less likely to want families and want to have more children. And so this then depresses the birth rate. And so there's a lot of problems, I think, that these societies have to face down 20 years from now. And a lot of societies, a lot of Western societies and, just developed nations really have to look at this, besides Scandinavia, which really seems to have a lot of childcare and parental leave and a lot of the things that promote a healthy birth rate.
I think the government has at least paid lip service to trying to fix these issues, greater maternity leave protections, paternity leave protections, restrictions on overtime, et cetera. But, is there something that you think could be done that would have a short to medium term impact?
What I think really needs to change are cultural attitudes. So I think one thing that could be done is at the workplace level. I think organizations or companies need to promote women better, try to find ways to get more women in leadership and lead by example and have role models for other women in the office. And if that means having some sort of quota system to put more women at the tops of companies in the form of boards, or have X number of women in middle management and upper management, then do it. I mean, that's a short-term fix, but they would replace men who are currently there in a way that changes the perspective and changes who's speaking at the table. And you're talking about short-term fixes. And I think that could have cascading effects. The other is what's happening at the home, right? This notion that even if you did give men parental leave, they're not taking it because there's so much pressure for men to be the ones that show up at work. And so something that really needs to happen is men need to take a greater share and just step up more when it comes to childcare and housework. That frees up women to then chase their ambitions a lot more. I certainly think that's what has allowed me to do my job and have a family. And so something needs to happen, and this is more of a medium or long-term change, but something needs to happen in terms of societal conversation about whose role it is to really manage the home. And it does not by any means have to be a woman. That is not biologically determined. The only biological thing that a woman really needs to do is incubate the baby and deliver it. And that is something that a man cannot do. But besides that, they can certainly be the lead parent at home. They can certainly care for a baby just as well as a mother can. And they can certainly do housework and clean and make food and all of those things. And so the notion that, it's a woman's job to stay at home after a baby is born, I think is societally determined and really needs to be interrogated and questioned.
You said you have two kids here.
I have three.
Three, I'm sorry, that's right. Are you raising them in the, I guess, Korean way? Are you sending them to public schools here? Are they going to the Hagwons? Are they integrating?
No. They go to international schools. Well, only two of them do. One of them is only 9 months old. So she can barely speak.
This is Korea. You got to hurry up. 9 months old. She can't speak English yet.
I'm not a tiger mom, and nor were my parents. My parents are super progressive and chill. I don't have those classic Asian parents. My mother's an artist by training turned diplomat, and my dad is just a chill, goofy dude. And so they were never people who were like, did you get straight A's? Do really well on your SAT, be a doctor or engineer. No, they didn't actually care at all. And so, my brother and I turned out as we have, not as doctors and engineers.
Wait, let me ask your assistant. Did Elise turn out okay? Yeah.
What is she supposed to say? She's sitting right here in front of us.
She's blinking to me Morse code. Don't believe a word. So why did you make the decision to send your kids to international school here? I mean, the obvious answer, right? But I mean, walk us through your decision-making process on that.
Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that as an expat, your community, it's really hard to find community. there are 97% of Korea is Korean. And so one of the only ways to find community was through my children, right? Finding friends through other parents, other expat parents. And so schools were immediate community for me. And so I sent Ava to a British school when we started, and immediately, you know, there were play dates, there were other parents that could kind of tell us where to shop and where to like get problem solved. And so that was something I bought into essentially by buying her into a private school. And ditto the second daughter, Issa's school. Issa's school has a separate community, and so I got to make more friends through that.
Is she at the French school?
No, no, they're both at.
Next will be at the German one. You know how
yeah. Then I can have German friends and French friends. It'd be awesome. No. No, now they're both at you know, primarily American influenced schools. And the major reason was that I wouldn't be able to navigate a Korean public school system because of the lack of language. So I needed English just to even be able to register and all of that. And so, or I needed schools that had that sort of infrastructure just to be able to register and get my kids into school.
All right. Well, we just had to change rooms mid-interview, so we have a bit of a different venue. The lighting's different. I don't really know how to continue, but we'll try.
It's brighter.
It's bright. Yeah, it's a bit, you know.
I can see you better now.
I don't know if that's a good thing. So what has been the most, I guess, your favorite story that you've ever had to cover? Let's say, well, Korea first, but then let's say career-wise.
Okay, favorite? Oh, that's really tough. I'm totally stumped because this is a surprise question for me. Favorite story. Okay, so something memorable to me in my time here in Asia was going up into the mountains of Japan, actually, to see elementary school students perform kabuki. Because this village was disappearing due to nobody living in rural areas anymore. But they are trying to keep up a 300-year-old kabuki tradition in which the elementary school kids in the village perform the kabuki. But there's only 6 elementary school kids left. And so they're keeping this entire elementary school open in order to keep the kabuki tradition going. And so going up into the mountains to do that was extremely memorable. Here in Korea, something very moving happened when I first moved here. It was the 1-year anniversary of the Seoul ferry tragedy, in which 300-some, mostly high school students, died in a very tragic accident, and largely because of skirting of various regulations by the shipping company that owned the boat, and because of lax government regulation as well, and enforcement and all these things. So it was extremely tragic. And a year later, I had moved here, and I think I'd only been on the ground for a couple of weeks, and was covering a memorial for these students, and met one of the mothers of the accident when she had 2 daughters, and it was her younger daughter who was killed at 16 years old. And the mom had just gotten her head shaved as part of a tradition, along with several other moms. And they were calling for greater investigation of what happened, because at the time the government just really wasn't responsive as to what exactly the details were on the day of the Seoul ferry tragedy. And I had moved here, and I guess I was like, it was March. So I guess I was like 6 months pregnant at the time. And so I was obviously showing, and I met her, we finished the interview, and so this doesn't really have that much to do with the story itself, but sort of the penumbra around the story, which is that she asked me if she could touch my belly. And I said, yeah, sure, you know. And she put her hands on my belly, and she said, I hope that your baby is healthy and that she lives a long life. And it was really moving. And it was just like one of those times where you really connect with a source in a way that just on a human level. And I'll never forget that. And like, I feel like Issa, who was the baby that was in my belly at the time, who's also my second daughter, and she lost her second daughter. I feel like Issa has like kind of an extra, you know, like an extra guardian angel watching over her because of that incident. And it happened so early in my time in Korea. And so I just will always remember that as being really special.
That's really nice. So there's going to be a lot of people that are coming over to Korea for the Pyeongchang 2018 Olympics. And so what is something under 100,000 won that you think everybody should invest in before coming to Korea?
Besides travel adapters?
Okay, travel adapters are definitely under 100.
Make sure it's it's like those European plugs, the 2-prong round. Make sure
they're not like the ones in Japan.
Right. Make sure you've got that ready to go. I have fried so many of my appliances as a result of not having the proper transformers. So I think that's a really important purchase. Under 100,000. There's so many things that I have really enjoyed in the skincare world here in South Korea. Like, it's very dry. So one thing that I should say is winters are very gloomy, and then the air is quite cold and dry. And so, but Korean women have excellent skin. Korean women and men have excellent skin. And there's a couple products that I think are go-to excellent products that are under 100,000 won. Misha, which is a skincare brand here, does something called Time Revolution Essence that you put on after you wash your face and before you put on moisturizer. I think that's the order. Korean women have like 12 steps of skincare. I was just like, when do I do this? Anyway, but you're supposed to do that. And I think this bottle is like $35 or something, $35 US. And it's excellent. It's kept my skin soft and supple. And so I think that's really great for winter. So if you're here,
you all can't see her supple, soft skin on the radio, but I can vouch for her. Yes. It is quite nice.
Thank you. And so, yeah, if you're coming here for Pyeongchang, it's going to be super cold up there because it's up in the mountains. And I think taking care of your skin would be something you can do for less than 100,000 won and support a local company.
What are NPR's plans to cover the Olympics?
We're going to have a team of, I think, including me, it'll be 6. And that will also include an editor and a blogger, a full-time blogger. And we will be out staying in the Media Village, which is in Gangneung. And really excited to be there. This is my first ever Olympics to cover. And I just don't know what the chaos is going to be quite like. And I know that all the venues are kind of spaced out. They're a little bit far from one another. And so we're going to be relying on shuttle buses to take us from Gangneung to Alpensia to Pyeongchang and back. And then not to mention Seoul, just getting out there too, from Seoul to the Olympic venues is going to be interesting on the new high-speed train route. So I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to having a team. Seun, my assistant, we work kind of unilaterally here. And so just to have the other NPR team members here, I think is going to be really exciting.
Are there any South Korean athletes that you've had your eye on that you think we should pay special attention to?
The one athlete that I've been paying attention to at all is the American snowboarder who is a Kpop, who's a Korean American, Chloe Kim. I think she's only 16 years old or something. And so she's a snowboarder. She got on the snowboard when she was 4 years old. And so I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to her just as an athlete. But in terms of stories, I'm on geopolitics, which means I'm going to be watching the hundreds of North Koreans that are going to be coming here. So it's only 22 North Korean athletes, but they roll deep. The North Koreans roll deep. So we're going to be among many, many North Koreans, a 30-member taekwondo troupe, 200-person cheering squad, officials, coaches, handlers, wranglers, all sorts of stuff. So that's going to be the big story that I'm going to be responsible for during the Olympics.
Do you anticipate having access to any of the North Koreans? Are you going to be able to ask them questions?
Well, the North Korean figure skaters, for example, have given press conferences. And what I mean by the North Korean figure skaters are the 2 North Koreans who have officially qualified for the Olympic Games. Those are the only North Korean athletes that officially qualified and aren't entering as wild cards as a result of the South Korean, North Korean
They're
deal.
A duo, right?
Yeah, it's a male-female duo, 25 and 18 years old. And they have given press conferences before. And so I imagine that they will, under the IOC infrastructure, be able to give some press conferences. Athletes will. And, this is a huge propaganda thing for North Koreans. And it's not like North Koreans are so isolated that they don't speak to the press. They just control what they say and who's saying it. And so they will give press conferences. They will be appearing in front of the press. how free they are to really like talk about conditions in rural North Korea, that's not going to be something that they're going to touch. But it'll be interesting, I think, not only as somebody who's covered the Koreas, but also just to watch the press frenzy as well. I don't think that I will get much of an opportunity to cover sports and that many sporting events. I think I'm going to be doing color, if you will, so the feature stories and politics for the most part. And that makes sense. You know, we have a sports reporter who's going to be here full time to really talk about the athleticism and the competition of curling or whatever else.
Oh, curling. I'm so excited.
I love curling.
I only care about it every 4 years, but every 4 years, I'm all about curling.
It's so intense.
What is the story that you wish you wrote?
I wish that I spent more time along the Chinese-North Korean border. I haven't, and largely because I have been pregnant or had a newborn for so much of my 3 years in Korea. So 2 out of my 3 children were born here in the last 3 years. And so as a result, I haven't been able to do long series type reporting that our other foreign correspondents have. For example, David Green, who was our Russia correspondent, decided to take the entire Trans-Siberian Railroad and do stories all along that way that then made for a book. You know, every foreign correspondent has that opportunity to really just dig deep and follow an old trading route or, do stories up and down a border or along a river or whatever. And I haven't been able to do that. That's a huge regret of mine, that I haven't been able to really spend time in the field, extended amount of time in the field. And that's largely as a result of having small children that I feed, so yeah, because I nurse all my children too. And so when I leave, I typically don't leave for long stretches. And if I do leave for long stretches, a baby comes with me. And so there's no way I'm going to take a baby down, up on the Yalu River and try and talk with defectors and brokers and things like that. And so that is something that I really regret not being able to do yet. Hopefully there's still time.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's still time.
All right, Elise, it's the rapid fire round.
I'm nervous.
First question is...
Yikes. Okay.
If you had to rename Korea, what would you call the country?
Oh, gosh. I think it has a great name. It really dates back to the old dynasties, right? Or an old dynasty. I don't know. I would call it something funny, right? Like Garlica.
Which subreddit would you make the best moderator of?
I would be the best moderator of a subreddit that changed topics every day, random topics every day, because there's nothing that I have devoted my energy to for a sustained amount of time and become really obsessed about. And so I would love to be a subreddit moderator that just switched. And that's in line with my work, too.
There's absolutely something like that for you. It's called Subreddit of the Day. So every day it highlights, an underappreciated or under-trafficked subreddit.
Love that.
What will your autobiography be called?
Chaos? I don't
Chaos with a K? That's it? You don't want to expand on that? It's not going to be, not even your name is not going to be on the front. Chaos with a K. And you got to write it in like red letters because that's like bad luck here.
No, I don't know. I really haven't thought about it. One of the things that I say when everything just happens to fall into place is, what else could go right? And so like when you're on a trip with me, for example, and like we make the train on time, we make the plane on time, or whatever, I'm always like, what else could go right? So I think that would be a great title for an autobiography.
Would you rather fight 100 duck-sized horses,
oh my God,
or 1 horse-sized duck?
This is ridiculous. 1 horse-sized duck, because maybe I could charm it. And then, so you're not like ganged up upon like by a bunch of animals. You're actually just working with one, and then it becomes a psychological battle rather than really just a technical one and a battle of strength. Instead, it's just like a battle of our minds.
She's been reading up on guerrilla warfare in light of North Korea's participation in the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics. You and your husband decide to start a 5-member band with your 3 kids. What is the name of that band, and what instrument does each person play?
Chaos. What instrument does each person play? I mean, is this like a traditional band where you need like a lead guitar and then bass?
This is whatever
and then
band you want. It's your band.
My daughter, Ava, my oldest daughter, is definitely the most theatrical and performative. And so I think that she would sing, and it would consist of a lot of songs where she makes up the lyrics. She's very creative. Luna, I guess I'd have Luna the baby on percussion. She's really good at banging things. Yeah, and she's happy. And then I guess Isa, my middle daughter. So Isa, my middle daughter, is really interesting. She doesn't like to be the center of attention, even though she's the goofiest one. So maybe I'd put her on bass. My husband, what would Maddie want to do? What did he play? So he played like when he was in high school and stuff. He played saxophone. So yeah, in the band.
I see why you married him.
Yeah, yikes. So I don't know what he would do though, because I feel like he's such a loner. What would he do in our band? Could he be like a roadie and just carry stuff? I feel like I want an all-girl band and then
and one roadie.
Right. And then I guess I would just take the keyboard because I have experience in that. I played piano for many years growing up.
So Chaos is the name of this band, of
yes,
this all-girl band.
I'm learning. I'm naming everything Chaos. Clearly, it's all applicable.
What is your favorite failure?
Actually, this will go back to my husband.
Careful.
No, and it's actually good. So my first year out of school, my first job out of school, I worked in Waco, Texas, at the CBS affiliate as a television reporter. And I only worked there 9 months before I got my next job because, Waco is the armpit of Texas and you don't want to stay there very long. And I got out of there as fast as I could. I almost accepted a job 6 months into that job to switch, but ultimately didn't.
Were there any other Chinese people in Waco?
Yeah, there was another one at my station.
Another
Thomas
one?
Lin.
Oh, wow.
No, he was a photographer. He was at my station. Yeah. He was Taiwanese American too.
Amazing.
Yeah, we're still friends. Anyway, so that year, I don't know. I was bored. I was in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and surrounded by other people who were also 21 or 22 or 23 years old. And so I started dating my photographer, which is the cameraman. And that was just like a really dysfunctional situation that was a huge fail. And I'm really glad that relationship failed because I then spent a lot of time in Dallas, which is 80 miles away. But I would drive up to Dallas just to get away from Waco. And that's how I ended up meeting Matt, who I married many years later. But had that whole situation with my photographer not been such an epic disaster, that wouldn't have led me to having a feminist husband who has really supported this life that we lead. So thanks, Matt.
Matt Stiles is also in journalism. He's a great writer. He works for the LA Times, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, he's very good. Find him on Twitter or Google. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
Gosh, last 5 years. So I have been a few different things. I would say one is I went back to a manual journal and schedule as a result of the Japanese. The Japanese are largely still using manual day planners, like actual analog day planners. And I adopted that through a system called the Hobonichi Techo. The Hobonichi Techo is a specific day planner that you can buy that's very popular. And I started doing that at the beginning of 2017, and I've loved it. And it's really lightweight and a way for me to kind of track my days and what's coming up. I also have a digital calendar, but not everything's on it. And I've really liked that. That's kind of, and I really like looking back on it too. And so I endorse the Hobonichi Techo. I also, because I've had 3 kids in the last 5 years, I am a big supporter of doing Pilates. So I always do that in the lead up to having babies and then afterwards too. And that's really kept my immunity strong because it helps with your blood flow and your posture and all these things. So that is a habit, I suppose, because it's something that I do on the regular. and enjoy, even though I'm generally not a person who loves to exercise. So I love both those things. And the other is something that I've just really enjoyed is that last year I took the challenge of reading 52 books in 1 year. And last year I read 52 books, and I'm so glad that I did. It helped me focus my energy and turn away from like these immediate alerts that we get on our phones and news alerts and the Twitter feeds and all of that. And I read a lot of fiction. I think 65% of what I read in 2017 was fiction. And so I really think that habit, if you want to just kind of quiet yourself and be more introspective and reflective, I think just sitting down and reading is a great way to do that.
What advice would you give to a young college student in their senior year, or maybe just fresh out of college, that is interested in a career as an international correspondent or living abroad, or just maybe has similar interests as you?
I would say one thing is that life and your career is not a race. When I advise young people, I find they do two things. One, often compare themselves to where other people their age are at. So like one of my friends who's 25 is like, oh, well, my roommate's already written a book and published a book, or my roommate did really well covering X story, Ferguson, or whatever it is. And so that sense of trying to compare and then reach certain milestones at a certain age is very weird for me, because time is so elastic and our lives are so long, and it just seems like an artificial metric to measure yourself by time. And so I would say my top piece of advice is not to race through things and just enjoy the journey. I really have always believed, ever since I was very young, like 8th grade, that satisfaction really lies in the journey and not a destination. And I've never really had a destination. I've just had a set of principles that I try and live by. And so that is advice number one. And then the other in journalism is to find mentors. So to find people that you consider role models that you really want to be like, that you want to read, and you want to read their stuff, you want to learn to write like them, or work like them, or report like them, ask questions in the way that they sort of are informed, or figure out how they're informed and that lead to the way they ask certain questions. I think that's really helpful to identify role models and then see if they'll be your mentors. There's nothing I think that I've achieved in my career or in my life that hasn't been through the generosity of others. And I'm aware of that and feel privileged by it. And so I always try to pay that forward too in young people that are interested in finding mentors. And it's so critical in journalism too, because they also open your network up. There's so many job opportunities that have come to me as a result of like people that have helped mentor me in my career, or people that I consider fairy godmothers or fairy godfathers in news organizations that have always tried to block and tackle on my behalf or for me. And so that, I think, is a really, really critical thing in this business, which can be quite cutthroat.
Last question. You mentioned you're an avid reader, particularly in 2017. What are 3 books that you would recommend to better understand Korea, Northeast Asia, journalism, or just 3 books that you really, really enjoy that you'd recommend to others? Okay,
so a quick one to get Korea that I read was your podcast guest, Dan Tudor's book, Korea, the Impossible Country.
Right.
So that one I just like sped through on my Kindle before I moved here and was like, okay, this gives me a really good sense.
It's a great 30,000 foot view.
Totally.
I have gifted that book to several family and friends that are, oh, you're living in Korea. Yeah. Hey, it's your birthday. Check out this book. It's actually a really good way to get kind of an overview of the country.
Right. So my only critique of that book is it spends a lot of time in the opening chapter or chapters about like the spiritual influences of Korea, like shamanism and mysticism, and I'm like Buddhism, Christianity. And I'm just like, that was really tough to get through to get to the rest of the stuff. So I wish it was in a different part of the book, but I can see why he structured it that way. But
right.
That's my only critique of it. Other books that I really like, Joan Didion is one of my favorite writers, and she wrote a series of dispatches when she was covering political races and politicians called Political Fictions. And that's one that I recommend a lot, just about to understand American politics. Technology, Gary Steitgart, is that how you pronounce his last name? Wrote Super Sad True Love Story, which came out in 2009 or 2010. And it was amazingly prescient when it comes to the world we live in now. It's also a hilarious book, but Super Sad True Love Story, if you haven't Reddit, I recommend to all my friends with a sense of humor and who live in, this really tech heavy and tech saturated society that we live in now. So those are just a few off the top of my head, but I'm, always interested in getting book recommendations and talking about them. So if you have ideas or have questions about like what to read, feel free to reach out to me. I'm really easy to find.
And how can they find you, Elise?
I'm on Twitter at ELISEWHO, Elise Who, a play on my last name. And you can find my work blog, elisegoeseast.tumblr.com. I'm on Facebook at facebook.com/EliseHughNPR. And my personal blog is heyelise.com.
Elise, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
A big, tremendous thank you to Elise for being so generous with her time. She's got a million different stories going on at once, and for her to take the time out of her busy day to sit down and record a much smaller show than NPR, I'm tremendously grateful for. Thank you to Gong Se-eun for setting us up. If you'd like to learn more about Elise, you can find her full contact details on the show page, available at www.settlersofseoul.com, along with show notes and links to things we talk about. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the usual social media suspects. Until next time.